The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. Chapter 20. Whether fortresses and certain other expedients to which princes often have recourse are profitable or hurtful. To govern more securely, some princes have disarmed their subjects. Others have kept the towns subject to them, divided by factions. Some have fostered hostility against themselves. Others have sought to gain over those who at the beginning of their reign were looked on with suspicion. Some have built fortresses. Others have dismantled and destroyed them. And though no definite judgment can be pronounced respecting any of these methods, without regarding to the special circumstances of the state to which it is proposed to apply them, I shall nevertheless speak of them in as comprehensive a way as the nature of the subject will admit. It has never chanced that any new prince has disarmed his subjects. On the contrary, when he has found them unarmed, he will always arm them. For the arms thus provided becomes yours. Those whom you suspected grow faithful, while those who were faithful at first continue so, and from your subjects become your partisans. And though all your subjects cannot be armed, yet if those of them whom you arm be treated with marked favor, you can deal more securely with the rest. For the difference which those whom you supply with arms perceive in their treatment will bind them to you, while the others will excuse you, recognizing that those who incur greater risk and responsibility merit greater rewards. But by disarming, you at once give offense, since you show your subjects that you distrust them, either as doubting their courage or as doubting their fidelity, each of which imputations begets hatred against you. Moreover, as you cannot maintain yourself without arms, you must have recourse to mercenary troops. What these are I have already shown, but even if they were good, they could never avail to defend you, at once against powerful enemies abroad and against subjects whom you distrust. Wherefore, as I have already said, new princes and new princedoms have always provided for their being armed, and of instances of this history is full. But when a prince acquires a new state, which thus becomes joined on like a limb to his old possessions, he must disarm its inhabitants, except such of them as have taken part with him while he was acquiring it. And even these, as time and occasion serve, he should seek to render soft and effeminate. And he must so manage matters that all the arms of the new state shall be in the hands of his own soldiers, who have served under him in his ancient dominions. Our forefathers, even such among them as were esteemed wise, were wont to say that Pistoja was to be held by feuds and Pisa by fortress, and on this principle used to promote dissensions in various subject towns with a view to retain them with less effort. At a time when Italy was in some measure in equilibrium, this may have been a prudent course to follow. But at the present day, it seems impossible to recommend it as a general rule of policy. For I do not believe that divisions purposefully caused can ever lead to good. On the contrary, when an enemy approaches, divided cities are lost at once, for the weaker faction will always side with the invader, and the other will not be able to stand alone. The Venetians, influenced, as I believe, by the reasons above mentioned, fostered the factions of Guelph and Ghibelline in the cities subject to them, and though they did not suffer blood to be shed, fomented their feuds, in order that the citizens, having their minds occupied with these disputes, might not conspire against them. But this, as we know, did not turn out to their advantage, for after their defeat at Velia, one of the two factions, suddenly taking courage, deprived them of the whole of their territory. Moreover, methods like these argue weakness in a prince, for under a strong government such divisions would never be permitted, since they are profitable only in time of peace as an expedient whereby subjects may be more easily managed. But when war breaks out, their insufficiency is demonstrated. Doubtless, princes became great by vanquishing difficulties in opposition, and fortune, on that account, when she desires to aggrandize a new prince who has more need than a hereditary prince to win reputation, causes enemies to spring up and urges them on to attack him, to the end that he may have opportunities to overcome them and make his ascent by the very ladder which they have planted. For which reason many are of the opinion that a wise prince, when he has the occasion, ought dexterously to promote hostility to himself in certain quarters, in order that his greatness may be enhanced by crushing it. Princes, and new princes especially, have found greater fidelity and helpfulness in those whom, at the beginning of their reign, they have held in suspicion, than in those who at the outset have enjoyed their confidence. And Pandolfo Petrucci, Lord of Siena, governed his state by the instrumentality of those whom he had at one time distrusted in preference to all others. But on this point it is impossible to lay down any general rule, since the course to be followed varies with the circumstances. This only I will say, that those men whom, at the beginning of a reign, have been hostile, if of a sort requiring support to maintain them, may always be won over by the prince with much ease, and are the more bound to serve him faithfully, because they know that they have to face by their conduct the unfavorable impression he had formed of them. In this way, a prince always obtains better help from them than from those who, serving him into complete security, neglect his affairs. And since the subject suggests it, I must not fail to remind the prince who acquires a new state, though through the favor of its inhabitants, to weigh well what were the causes which led to those who favored him to do so. And if it be seen that they have acted not from any natural affection for him, but merely out of discontent with the former government, that he will find the greatest difficulty in keeping them his friends, since it will be impossible for him to content them. Carefully considering the cause of this, with the aid of examples from times ancient and modern, he will perceive that it is far easier to secure the friendship of those whom, being satisfied with things as they stood, were for that very reason his enemies, than of those who sided with him and aided him in his usurpation only because they were discontented. It has been customary for princes, with a view to hold their dominions more securely, to build fortresses which might serve as a curb and restraint on such as have designs against them, and as a safe refuge against a first onset. I approve this custom, because it has been followed from the earliest times. Nevertheless, in our days, Messer Niccolo Machiavelli thought it prudent to dismantle 2 fortresses in Città di Castello in order to secure that town, and Guido Ubaldo, Duke of Urbino, on returning to his dominions, whence he had been driven by Caesar Borgia, raised to their foundations the fortresses throughout the dukedom, judging that if these were removed, it would not only be so easily lost. A like course was followed by the Bentivolghi on their return to Bologna. Fortresses, therefore, are useful or not, according to circumstances, and if one way they benefit, in another they injure you. We may state the case thus: the prince, who is more afraid of his subjects than of strangers, ought to build fortresses, while he who is more afraid of strangers than of his subjects should leave them alone. The citadel built by Francesco Sforza in Milan has been, and will hereafter prove to be, more dangerous to the house of Sforza than any other disorder of that state. So that, on the whole, the best fortress you can have is in not being hated by your subjects. If they hate you, no fortresses will save you. For when once the people take up arms, foreigners are never wanting to assist them. Within our time, it does not appear that fortresses have been of service to any prince, unless to the Countess of Forli, after her husband Count Girolamo was murdered. For by this means she was able to escape the first onset of the insurgents, and awaiting succor from Milan, to recover her state. To circumstances of the times not allowing any foreigner to lend assistance to the people. But afterwards, when she was attacked by Caesar Borgia, and the people, out of hostility to her, took part with the invader, her fortresses were of little avail, so that, both on this and on the former occasion, it would have been safer for her to have had no fortresses than to have had her subjects for enemies. All which considerations taken into account, I shall applaud him who builds fortresses and him who does not, but I shall blame him who, trusting in them, reckons it a light thing to be held in hatred by his people. Chapter 21. How a prince should bear himself so as to acquire reputation. Nothing makes a prince so well thought of as to undertake great enterprises and give striking proofs of his capacity. Among the princes of our time, Ferdinand of Aragon, the present King of Spain, may almost be accounted a new prince, since from one of the weakest he has become, for fame and glory, the foremost king in Christendom. And if you consider his achievements, you will find them all great and some extraordinary. In the beginning of his reign, he made war on Granada, which enterprise was the foundation of his power. At first he carried on the war leisurely, without fear of interruption, and kept the attention and thoughts of the Baron of Castile so completely occupied with it, that they had no time to think of changes at home. Meanwhile he insensibly acquired reputation among them and authority over them. With the money of the church and of his subjects, he was able to maintain his armies, and during the prolonged contest to lay the foundations of that military discipline which afterwards made him so famous. Moreover, to enable him to engage in still greater undertakings, always covering himself with the cloak of religion, he had recourse to what may be called pious cruelty, in driving out and clearing his kingdom of the Moors, than which exploit none could be more wonderful or uncommon. Using the same pretext, he made war on Africa, invaded Italy, and finally attacked France. And being thus constantly busied in planning and executing vast designs, he kept the minds of his subjects in suspense and admiration, and occupied with the results of his actions, which arose one out of the other, in such close succession as left neither time nor opportunity to oppose them. Again, it greatly profits a prince in conducting the internal government of his state to follow striking methods such as are recorded of Messer Banalbo of Milan. Whenever the remarkable actions of any one in civil life, whether for good or for evil, afford him occasion, and to choose such ways of rewarding and punishing as cannot fail to be much spoken of, but above all, he should strive by all his actions to inspire a sense of greatness and goodness. A prince is likewise esteemed who is a stanch friend and a thorough foe. That is to say, who without reserve openly declares for one against another, this being always a more advantageous course than to stand neutral. For supposing two of your powerful neighbors to come to blows, it must either be that you have or have not reason to fear the one who comes off victorious. In either case, it will always be well for you to declare yourself and join in frankly with one side or another. For should you fail to do so, you are certain, in the former of the cases put, to become the prey of the victor to the satisfaction and delight of the vanquished. And no reason or circumstance that you may plead will avail to shield or shelter you. For the victor dislikes doubtful friends, and such as will not help him at a pinch, and the vanquished will have nothing to say to you, since you would not share his fortunes sword in hand. When Antiochus, at the instance of the Anatolians, passed into Greece in order to drive out the Romans, he sent envoys to the Achaeans, who were friendly to the Romans, exhorting them to stand neutral. The Romans, on the other hand, urged them to take up arms on their behalf. The matter coming to be discussed on the council of the Achaeans, the legate of Antiochus again urged neutrality, whereupon the Roman envoy answered, "Nothing can be less to your advantage than the course which has been recommended as the best and most useful for your state, namely, to refrain from taking any part in our war. For by standing aloof, you will gain neither favor, nor fame, but remain the praise of the victor. It will always happen that he who is not your friend will invite you to neutrality, while he who is your friend will call on you to declare yourself openly in arms. Irresolute princes, to escape immediate danger, commonly follow the neutral path, in most instances to their destruction, but when you pronounce valiantly in favor of one side or other, if he to whom you give your adherence conquers, although he be powerful and you at his mercy, still he is under obligations to you and has become your friend. And none are so lost to shame as to destroy with manifest ingratitude one who has helped them. Besides which, victories are never so complete that the victor can afford to disregard all considerations whatsoever, more especially considerations of justice. On the other hand, if he with whom you take part should lose, you will always be favorably regarded by him, while he will aid you, and you become his companion in a cause which may recover. In the second case, namely, when both combatants are of such limited strength that whichever wins you have no cause to fear, it is all the more prudent for you to take a side, for you will then, by ruining the one with the help of the other, who were he wise, would endeavor to save him. If he whom you help conquers, he remains in your power, and with your aid he cannot but conquer. And here let it be noted that a prince should be careful never to join with one stronger than himself in attacking others, unless, as already said, he be driven to it by necessity. For if he whom you join prevails, you are at his mercy, and princes, so far as in them lies, should avoid placing themselves at the mercy of others. The Venetians, although they might have declined the alliance, joined with France against the Duke of Milan, which brought about their ruin. But when an alliance cannot be avoided, as with the case with the Florentines, when the Pope and Spain together led their armies to attack Lombardy, a prince, for the reasons given, must take a side. Nor let it be supposed that any state can choose for itself a perfectly safe line of policy. On the contrary, it must reckon on every course which it may take being doubtful. For it happens in all human affairs that we never seek to escape one mischief without failing into another. Prudence, therefore, consists in knowing how to distinguish degrees of disadvantage, and in accepting a less evil as a good. Again, a prince should show himself a patron of merit, and should honor those who excel in every art. He ought accordingly to encourage his subjects by enabling them to pursue their callings, whether mercantile, agricultural, or any other, in security, so that this man shall not be deterred from beautifying his possessions from the apprehension that they may be taken from him, or that other refrain from opening a trade through fear of taxes. And he should provide rewards for those who desire so to employ themselves, and for all who are disposed in any way to add to the greatness of his city or state. He ought, moreover, at suitable seasons of the years, to entertain the people with festivals and shows, and because all cities are divided into guilds and companies, he should show attention to these societies and sometimes take part in their meetings, offering an example of courtesy and munificence, and always maintain the dignity of his station, which must under no circumstances be compromised. Chapter 22 of the Secretaries of Princes. The choice of ministers is a matter of no small moment to a prince. Whether they shall be good or not depends on his prudence, so that the readiest conjecture we can form of the character and sagacity of a prince is from seeing what sort of men he has about him. When they are at once capable and faithful, we may always account him wise, since he has known to recognize their merit and to refrain their fidelity. But if they be otherwise, we must pronounce unfavorably of him, since he was committed a first fault in making this selection. There was none who knew Messer Antonio of Fernafro as minister of Pandolfo Petrucci, Lord of Siena, but thought Pandolfo a most prudent ruler in having him for his servant. And since there are three scales of intelligence, one which understands by itself, a second which understands what is shown it by others, and a third which understands neither by itself nor on the showing of others, the first of which is most excellent, the second good, but the third worthless. We must needs admit that if Pandolfo was not in the first of these degrees, he was in the second. For when one has the judgment to discern the good from the bad in what another says or does, though he be devoid of invention, he can recognize the merits and demerits of his servants, and will commend the former while he corrects the latter. The servant cannot hope to deceive such a master, and will continue good. As to how a prince is to know his minister, the unerring rule may be laid down. When you see a minister thinking more of himself than of you, and in all his actions seeking his own ends, that man can never be a good minister, or one that you can trust. For he who has the charge of the state committed to him ought not to think of himself, but only of his prince, and should never bring to the notice of the latter what does not directly concern him. On the other hand, to keep his minister good, the prince should be considerate of him, dignifying him, enriching him, binding him to himself by benefits, and sharing with him the honors as well as the burthens of the state, so that the abundant honors and wealth bestowed upon him may divert him from seeking them at other hands, while the great responsibilities wherewith he is charged may lead him to dread change, knowing that he cannot stand alone with his master's support. When prince and minister are upon this footing, they can mutually trust one another, but when the contrary is the case, it will always fare ill with one or other of them.